She called 911 herself. That is the first thing you need to understand about this case. The person now charged with second-degree murder in the death of Christian Obumseli is the same person who dialed 911 at 4:57 in the afternoon on April 3, 2022, from the 22nd floor of a luxury high-rise in Miami, Florida, and said the words that operators and investigators have been analyzing ever since. "My boyfriend is dying of a stab wound." And then, as Christian Obumseli could be heard in the background saying he couldn't feel his arms, the caller added something that became one of the most discussed lines in this entire case. "Baby, I'm so sorry." She called 911 to say she said she was sorry. She told officers when they arrived, covered in his blood, that he was her other half, that she needed him, that she didn't want him to die. And then the medical examiner looked at the wound, and the medical examiner's findings contradicted almost everything she said about how he got it. This is 911 crime. Every source used in this video is linked in the description. Check it yourself. That is how this channel works. Before we get into the forensics and the legal proceedings that have been unfolding since 2022, I want to tell you who Christian Obumseli was. Because in too much of the coverage of this case, he has been reduced to a footnote: the boyfriend, the victim, the name attached to the charge. He was more than that. Christian Tobechukwu Obumseli was 27 years old. His friends called him Toby. He was born on April 12, 1994, in Dallas, Texas, to a Nigerian-American family. He had played college football at Abilene Christian University until injuries redirected his path. He moved into cryptocurrency trading and built a life for himself in Miami. People who knew him described him as someone with a radiant personality, someone whose energy filled a room, someone who showed up for people. He had a future he was building piece by piece. On the afternoon of April 3, 2022, the last afternoon of his life, Christian left the apartment he shared with his girlfriend at 1:15 in the afternoon. He came back at 4:33 in the afternoon. He brought sandwiches for both of them. That detail is in the investigative record. He came back to the apartment he shared with a woman prosecutors would later describe as someone who had been violent toward him multiple times, and he brought food. Less than 30 minutes later, he was dying on the floor of that apartment with a knife wound in his chest. Courtney Clenney was 26 years old at the time of Christian's death. She went by the name Courtney Taylor on social media, where she had built a following of more than 2 million people across Instagram and OnlyFans. She was, by any public measure, someone living a visible and well-documented life. Parties, travel. A luxury apartment on the 22nd floor of One Paraíso in Miami's Edgewater neighborhood, one of the most expensive residential buildings in the city. She and Christian had been together since November 2020, approximately 17 months. And the record of those 17 months, the police reports, the hotel incident reports, the building surveillance footage, the secret audio recordings Christian made of Clenney, is a document of a relationship that prosecutors described as tempestuous and combative, and that investigators concluded had a consistent pattern of aggression. In July 2021, 9 months into the relationship, Clenney was charged with domestic battery against Obumseli at a hotel in Las Vegas. That charge is in the record. In February 2022, 2 months before Christian's death, an incident occurred in the elevator of their apartment. Building that was captured on the building's surveillance camera. The footage shows Clenney striking Obumseli while he attempts to ward her off. It shows her pounding the touch screen of the elevator panel. It shows behavior that, when prosecutors played it in court hearings, required explanation from the defense that the defense has struggled to provide. 2 days before Christian died, Clenney called police and told them that Obumseli was stalking her after she had broken up with him. She asked about a restraining order. Officers who responded noted that she appeared intoxicated and that the allegations of physical violence against her were, in her own words on camera, not really a concern. The couple had briefly separated when she kicked him out of her apartment in late March. He came back on April 1st. Officers were called that same day. 2 days later, he brought sandwiches, and 2 days later, he was dead. Clenney's account of what happened inside the apartment on April 3rd is the foundation of her defense and the central dispute of this entire case. According to Clenney and her attorneys, an argument escalated. Obumseli became physically threatening, and she threw a knife at him from approximately 10 feet away in an act of self-defense. She did not strike him deliberately. She threw the knife to stop his advance. That is her account, and she has maintained it consistently since the night of the incident. The medical examiner looked at the wound and reached a different conclusion. According to the autopsy report, Christian Obumseli died from a stab wound to the chest. The knife punctured the subclavian artery. The wound was 3 inches deep, and the wound was consistent with a forceful downward thrust, not with a knife thrown from a distance of 10 feet. A knife thrown from 10 feet away does not produce a 3-inch downward penetration of a major artery. The physics don't support it. The wound angle doesn't support it. The depth doesn't support it. The medical examiner's conclusion was that the wound was caused by a deliberate downward strike, not a throw from across the room. That finding is what transformed this case from a domestic incident into a murder charge. Clenney's defense has countered that the medical examiner's interpretation is contested and that the prosecution's theory oversimplifies what happened in a moment of acute fear and chaos. They have argued that in domestic violence situations, the line between aggressor and victim is not always clean. They have argued that Christian Obumseli was not a passive figure in the relationship, and that evidence of his own behavior has been systematically minimized. They have argued that at worst, this was reckless conduct, not premeditated murder, and that the charge of second-degree murder is an overreach. But prosecutors have pointed to something that the defense has had difficulty fully addressing. Christian Obumseli knew he was in danger. He knew well enough to document it. In the months before his death, he made secret audio recordings of Clenney, recordings that captured her behavior, her words, her conduct toward him. He made them without her knowledge. He made them because he needed a record, a man who brings sandwiches in the afternoon and keeps secret. Recordings of his girlfriend does not fit the profile of the aggressor in the relationship. Those two facts sit side by side in this case, and they don't resolve into a clean narrative for either side. Courtney Clenney was not arrested on the night of April 3rd. Investigators spent 4 months building their case. She left Miami. She traveled to Hawaii, where, according to her attorney, she was seeking treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder and substance abuse. On August 10, 2022, 4 months after Christian's death, U.S. Marshals working with the Hawaii County Police Department arrested her on the Big Island. She was extradited back to Florida and has remained behind bars without bond ever since. That detail alone is significant. She has been in custody since August 2022. As of this recording, that is nearly 4 years without a trial. 4 years in jail awaiting a verdict on a case that has been delayed, derailed, and complicated at nearly every turn by a series of legal battles that have kept it off the courtroom floor and in the headlines for reasons that have nothing to do with the evidence. The first major disruption came from within the defense itself. In early 2024, Clenney's parents, Deborah Lynn Clenney and Kim DeWayne Clenney, were arrested in Austin, Texas on out-of-state warrants. The charge? Allegedly accessing Christian Obumseli's personal laptop without authorization after his death. Text messages that surfaced during the investigation showed family members and their legal team discussing ways to guess Christian's password and unlock his device. The hacking charges were ultimately dropped after a judge ruled that investigators had improperly accessed messages protected by attorney-client privilege. But the episode gave the defense new ammunition for a larger argument they had been building for months. The defense alleged prosecutorial misconduct, serious misconduct. They argued that the Miami-Dade State Attorney's Office had viewed privileged defense strategies. That evidence had been withheld. that witnesses had been hidden from the defense. They filed motions to dismiss the entire case. They filed motions to have the entire state attorney's office disqualified. They argued that the prosecution had so thoroughly contaminated the proceedings that Clenney could not receive a fair trial under the current circumstances. In March 2025, the lead prosecutor on the case, Assistant State Attorney Khalil, Queen Anne, stepped down after a judge ruled that prosecutors had violated attorney-client privilege by collecting texts and emails between Clenney's parents and their attorneys, even if prosecutors were unaware at the time that the parents had retained legal counsel. The case had to be rebuilt around a new prosecutor. The trial, which had been set for December 2025, was pushed back. A new trial date was set for April 27, 2026. That date came and went. The trial was delayed again, pushed to summer 2026. The judge, who has grown visibly frustrated with both sides across multiple hearings, told attorneys in one exchange that became widely quoted, "This is not going to turn into a telenovela." That line landed in the public record alongside footage of something that happened before the same hearing even officially began. Courtney Clenney, seated at the defense table, was observed by reporters in the courtroom sticking out her tongue, pursing her lips in a kissing motion, and making what observers described as playful faces toward the gallery. Not during testimony, not during cross-examination. Before the hearing started, while attorneys were preparing to argue over expert witnesses and evidence admissibility in a second-degree murder. Case behavioral analysts who have followed this case have noted that courtroom demeanor in high-profile cases is carefully observed by everyone in the room, including jurors, once they are seated. What Courtney Clenney chose to do with her face before a murder hearing began, and what a jury will eventually make of the full pattern of her behavior across this case, remains to be seen. The secret recordings Christian made are at the center of an ongoing legal dispute. The prosecution sought to have jurors hear recordings Obumseli made of Clenney without her knowledge. The defense argued that because they were covert, they should be suppressed entirely. Judge Andrea Wolfson split the ruling. She excluded most of the recordings but allowed those captured in shared spaces, the apartment balcony, the building lobby, where there is no reasonable expectation of privacy. What those recordings contain has not been fully detailed in public proceedings. But a man who felt compelled to secretly document his girlfriend's behavior in shared spaces for months before he died made a choice that investigators and prosecutors believe tells its own story. As of this recording, the trial is scheduled for summer 2026. Courtney Clenney has been in custody for nearly 4 years. She has pleaded not guilty. Her defense maintains that she acted in self-defense. The prosecution maintains that the wound is inconsistent with her account and that the pattern of documented aggression across their relationship makes her the aggressor, not the victim. Christian Obumseli was 27 years old. He was a cryptocurrency trader from Dallas, Texas, who played college football and built a life in Miami. On the last afternoon of his life, he left the apartment and came back with sandwiches. He had been making secret recordings of his girlfriend because he knew something was wrong. He knew well, enough to document it. He just didn't know the documentation would outlast him. His family has filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Clenney. They have been present at hearings. They have watched this case get delayed, derailed, and complicated across nearly 4 years of legal maneuvering while Christian's name gets attached to motions about attorney-client privilege and iCloud access and prosecutorial misconduct. They are waiting for a trial that keeps not happening. The medical examiner's conclusion has not changed. The wound was 3 inches deep. The angle was downward. The subclavian artery was severed. A knife thrown from 10 feet away does not do that. The trial is coming. The jury will hear the 911 call, the one where she says he's dying and she's sorry. They will hear the medical examiner's testimony about the wound, They will see the elevator footage from February 2022. They will weigh the defense's account against the forensic record, and they will decide what happened on the 22nd floor of One Paraíso in Miami on the afternoon of April 3rd, 2022, between a woman who called 911 to save the man she had just stabbed and a man who brought sandwiches to an apartment where someone had been secretly recording. The danger he was in when that verdict comes. 911 Crime will be here. Every verified fact, every confirmed source used in this video is in the description below. Check it, share it. This is 911 Crime.